So let's start off with conflict that's obviously been going on in Eastern Europe with Russia, Ukraine. We have Israel. Things are getting pretty hot with China and Taiwan. The world is becoming a pretty unstable place. What are your current thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, number one, it's really devastating. It's very easy, I think, as an American to be emotionally isolated from what is going on, and specifically from the death and suffering. And when that happens, I think it can be really dangerous for the decisions, especially that policymakers are making. Because throughout our whole entire history, we have rarely ever had to deal with blood on our own soil, war on our own soil, outside of the Civil War, which was, self-inflicted. So when we see stuff like this happening around the world, it's, easy to beat the war drum. And I don't like to engage in things that people typically look at as feeling like conspiracy theories. But because many times when you look at government involvement in things, it's like, is that the result of incompetence or is that malevolence? And for it to be the result of malevolence, you have to have a high degree of competency. You have to have a high degree of organization, so many people involved, and you just don't get those types of people and results in bureaucracies, especially the large ones like governments. And so I do typically like to chalk things up to incompetence more often than not. But one thing that you've always said is as long as war remains profitable,
There will never
it'll
be
never
peace.
end.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
There will never be peace. And especially when it's profitable for the people who are making the decisions.
Yeah.
So just within the last few months, you look at the trades made by members of Congress. They've been investing heavily in defense stocks. You look at what's been happening with Ukraine, the tide of public sentiment has been shifting. More and more people were becoming fed up with the amount of money being sent to Ukraine, funding, that proxy war. And wouldn't you know that 4 days after the government shutdown was averted by stopping the funding to Ukraine, Republicans gave Democrats everything they wanted, no spending cuts outside of cut the funding to Ukraine. 4 days later, this whole thing blows up in Israel. And within a couple of days after that, there's already a bill to send $2 billion to Israel. And the slush fund for the military industrial complex just doesn't stop. And it's shocking to see the amount of bipartisan support for this war, politically speaking. And so the more we have the decision makers with no downside to war and a lot of upside to war, we're gonna continue to see more of it.
Yeah, and the obvious sort of level one thinking on this stuff is the military industrial complex, right? Yet we all know that war is extremely profitable. But after that, we have so many other war profiteers, right? We have
Right.
all of the big construction companies, the companies that do the rebuilding, the medical industrial complex. I mean, it's just on and on and on, the profiteering. There are just too many entrenched interests, and especially since the US is the biggest provider of the military equipment to a lot of these countries, right? Our defense contractors are becoming extremely rich because, a lot of that stuff isn't outsourced because of security clearance issues, right?
Right.
So it is made in America, okay? If we can avoid sending American troops and fight these proxy wars, that's just kind of a good financial deal for the profiteers, right? That there's no American blood and lots of money coming in. But obviously that increases the debt levels and so on and so forth. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, how this affects people on a personal level. And I don't mean obviously the loss of life and the devastation and so forth, but financially speaking, this pushes the price of resources and commodities higher because war is just massively destructive. Things blow up. The amount of fuel, the amount of supplies that are used in weapon systems is astronomical. I mean,
Right.
it's just unbelievable. The environmental damage is insane. So, what should people be doing about their own financial situation? The likelihood of war being inflationary, I think, is
Mhm.
extremely likely, if not almost 100% sure, because it increases debt levels too, in addition to using all the resources, right? Talk to us about some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's start off with just the basic understanding of what inflation is and what causes it. So within economics, it's always ceteris paribus, which is all else being equal. And so let's say we doubled the money supply, that would drastically increase prices of things, all else being equal, because now you have more money floating around. So it takes more money to get the same amount of stuff. Similarly, the exact same effect would take place if you had the same amount of money and then you just cut the amount of stuff in half. Because then again, the relative relationship between the amount of money and the amount of stuff is that you have more money relative to the amount of stuff. And so it takes more money to get that same amount of stuff. And so while we do have like the Fed engaging in deflationary monetary policy right now, they're tightening, they're reducing their balance sheet, they're raising interest rates. You have fiscal policy right now, which is just massively inflationary. Number one, high interest rates are pulling more dollars into circulation through the reverse repo market right now. But number two, you have a destruction of resources. Like you mentioned, massive destruction takes place with war and preparation for war. You have all of the raw materials that are necessary to just make this stuff, all the steel, all the lead, all the copper, all the aluminum, all the gasoline, all the oil, all the raw materials, then to transport it for the express purpose of it being destroyed. And
Right.
not just that stuff being destroyed, the destruction of everything that it's used on. So the buildings, and then the rebuilding costs of everything, the concrete, the steel, the energy, just to get back up to where you were before.
Yeah.
And so, like you said,
So no real progress is made for humanity, unfortunately,
massive
out of any of
setback.
this. Yeah,
Right.
right. I mean, it's crazy when I hear, just as a quick aside, that people say, "Well, war stimulates the economy." That's like saying caffeine stimulates you. Yeah, for a little while it does, but then the crash is you have to pay it back, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be more like saying that meth stimulates you. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, you might get that little
it's
short-term
obviously
benefit, but
bad
it
for you, right?
massively
Yeah,
decreases your overall life expectancy,
yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah, so it is just massively devastating. The economic cost, putting aside all of the human cost, all of those resources, all that energy, all that cost being freely available for other uses allows the price to be at the natural rate, allows people to use it for what it's most profitable for, and allows the creation of wealth. And so it just diverts all of this for destruction and makes everything more expensive, ceteris paribus.